Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona, how are you doing?
I am doing well, if you can call having a slight existential crisis about my writing career doing well.
Oh, just another day in the life of a writer, nothing new about that. Fiona, what is your existential crisis? Let's just jump right into it.
Well, I've been fretting about AI, and I know that after our brilliant interview with Gus Silber, I should not be fretting about it. But I've been thinking about how AI is coming for us as writers and how it can be used as a tool to sort of produce books at super speed. And I just think that where we are most vulnerable is in the more formulaic genre writing. I can see AI. I've seen enough really scarily good examples of AI writing, which obviously is scraping and plagiarizing from existing writers, and that's what makes it good. But I've seen enough examples of it that I can imagine genre writing being completely taken over by AI. And what does that leave us? And I'm thinking, well, maybe that only leaves us with literary fiction, which is maybe not a very happy prospect, but that's where my mind's going at the moment. How to be really original, how to bring that human element in a way that will make me not replaceable by AI.
So you know that I do not agree with your worries on this. I do not believe we're replaceable. Mm-hmm. Gus inspired me completely to see it as a tool. I really do believe that we will continue to know the difference between an AI written thing and a real written thing, and we will just relate to it. I don't think AI will ever be a runaway writer bestseller because there will be something lacking from it. Mm-hmm. Yes, there might be a kind of a bottom of the charts type of AI writing, but I don't think you're going to see beautiful AI writing, especially after I see what it did. You know, these AIs are attending meetings now, and everyone on the meeting gets sent a summary of the meeting. Mm-hmm. And listen, it makes you realize that AI is not taking over the writing anytime soon, because AI can't summarize a meeting with any clarity. It hallucinates terribly. It's hilarious. I'm really not worried, but if it is a jumping off point for you to write a literary novel that maybe hopefully you also want to be writing, then that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, okay. You've made me feel a bit better. Tell me how your writing week has been.
The thing is, the irony is I'm leaning into more genre writing with the next project that I'm hoping to start, and I'm in that phase. I have the idea. I've let it stew for a bit, and now I have to start writing. Otherwise, it's going to just turn into an overcooked stew. And I have, for reasons unknown to me, decided that I will start it on the 1st of the month, which this coming month is Friday. So it's ridiculous. And it's not a good day to start a project, but it is also, we pre-record. So it is also November, and NaNoWriMo and everyone's writing a book, and maybe I feel like I'll be part of everybody else writing a book. I don't know. I've got to work out a structural issue by then, and I like that I've set myself a deadline, that I have to have sorted out that structural problem in my own head. And I'm feeling that thing of, ooh, exciting. There's a blank page waiting for me, and I'm going to start writing on it soon. And I'm almost loving this build-up.
Oh, that's nice. That's actually very inspiring. I like that.
Well, let's see if I do it. I'll report back.
And what have you been reading or watching or listening to inspire you?
So I've gone back to a beloved writer. This is one of my, I will buy whatever she writes as soon as she writes it. Leanne Moriarty, whose new book, Here One Moment is Art. It is obscenely priced on Kindle, and I am quite schnorrer about Kindle spending. I don't easily spend on Kindle. It's got to be a 99p or a KU, or I don't know what I did. I must have been feeling very self-indulgent, or possibly I've had too much wine, because I don't have any memory, but I pre-ordered it and it just landed on my Kindle happily.
As though you never actually paid for it.
I don't know what I paid for it. I don't know how it happened, but there it was waiting for me on my Kindle, and thank goodness it was, because I absolutely loved it. Here one moment starts with the premise of we are on an aeroplane and it's a flight from Tasmania to Australia, I think.
Yes.
And as the flight is about to end, a woman stands up and she counts herself in. She goes 3, 2, 1, and she starts walking through the plane, telling everyone their age of death and how they die. Mm. And then the story follows those people. And I know I'm not giving spoilers because I've just listened to her on a podcast. I know how she describes the book. And within a few months, the first prediction comes true. And oh my God, is she in fact a psychic? And are all these terrible predictions going to come true? And that sounds dark and heavy and difficult, and it's not. Okay. It is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I cannot recommend it enough.
Okay, well, I'm actually kind of relieved to hear that because that is my current read. I've just started it. I'm still on the plane with her. She's predicting these dire endings to everybody, and I kind of hate that because I was convinced they're all going to come true, and it's just pancreatic cancer and workplace accidents, and it all sounds very awful. So I've been slightly put off by the premise, but I trust you that it's going to become fun and it's going to be lovely. So
trust me, Fiona, trust me, walk down this. Although I think sometimes when you've trusted me, you've come back and said, I don't know why I trusted you, but I hope that this won't be the same. What about you?
Well, I've just finished reading Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, and I've read her other books, and this one is my new favorite of the lot. It used to be Normal People, but now it's Intermezzo, which is a chess term. It's a move that someone makes that demands an immediate counter move. So if your opponent has been planning some sort of strategy, they first have to answer this move before they can proceed to their next move, which had to be explained to me by my chess playing husband and son.
They're very chess playing, your husband and son.
They're very chess playing, yes. So it was a world that I felt I had at least a slight acquaintance with. It's lovely. It's so brilliant. She is so clever. She is so smart. And an interesting thing I've been seeing lately is that because she's a highly intellectual, highly literary writer, but also wildly successful. I mean, there were midnight release parties for this book, not seen since J.K. Rowling was writing the Harry Potter series. You know, people crowding into bookshops. The Book Lounge did one at midnight. So when the book came out from under embargo, people could buy it and celebrate it immediately. Now that is a phenomenon. And it has led to people starting to become a bit sniffy about her books now. Well, if everybody likes it, you know, can it really be that good? If it's so popular, has she sold out or was I wrong about how good it was in the first place?
Such an interesting phenomena. I'm going to confess something in a small voice. I haven't read her. I've developed one of those weird mental blocks, and not because I think it would be too sell out of me, because I'm the first person to sell out of anything, but almost the opposite. I'm scared it's too intellectual for me.
I mean, she is very, very smart and very cerebral, and there are times when I almost feel as though she's leaning into that perhaps a little too much. But they are such great stories and such great characters.
Where must I start?
Start with Normal People. It was her first book, and it's absolutely lovely. And if you love it, you can then watch the series as well, and then decide if you want to push on after that. But that is really a lovely book.
I will do that, Fiona.
And it's actually been a bit of a rough transition for me because I went from Sally Rooney to Leanne Moriarty, who I normally absolutely love and worship the ground she walks on. But I just want more Sally Rooney. And it's been hard for me to get onto Leanne Moriarty, but especially now knowing that it's not as bleak as the premise, I'm going to push on, and I'm sure I'm going to end up loving it. So another book that we are all madly looking forward to, and I think it probably will have been released by the time this podcast is released, is Spud, The Reunion, which is written by our guest today. Our guest today is John van der Ruit. John is the author, of course, of the Spud series of books, including most recently the 5th book in the series, Spud, the Reunion. John is also a well-known actor and playwright. Welcome, John, and thank you for your time.
Oh, great to be on your show. Thank you, Fiona and Gail.
Fiona, I don't even know why you bothered introducing him. Everyone knows who John van der Ruit is. This is one where we don't have to give a background. John.
Oh, guys. Yes. Please.
Tell us how your writing week has been. How is the writing week of a famous needs no introduction writer?
Well, I will introduce you to a typical writing week for me, because obviously right now I'm just in the post stages of finishing a book, so not in the writing stages. But for the last 17 months, generally, my life has looked, I would say, quite monotonous. But I think you have to do that to write a book. You guys would know that. There's a sense of the grind as well, but a beautiful grind. So it looks to me like, look, I remember I was in the theatrical world, and I mean, that's been my career when I haven't been writing Spud books, but so that encourages you to stay up later. But I also have this feeling now that as I get older, I prefer writing. I actually feel like the morning I'm most productive, followed by the afternoon, followed by the evening. But, when the push comes to shove, you can write at any time. But generally, I'll start, wake up, have some nice strong cup of coffee. And from the moment I wake up, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to be writing that day, almost trying to get through those mental obstacles of what might challenge me, hooks that I'm going to grab onto that day, knowing already what I'm going to be working on, whatever section of the book or what I'm going to be attempting. So I will then, in that pre-time, almost just be building myself up. At about 9:30, I will then fire up the computer, and I have an office upstairs that overlooks my garden, so that allows me sort of some nature input, so it's not all just screen. And then I will just work until I get too exhausted. But generally, I clear my life. It's like, I'm sure you guys have that too, that challenge of how you balance friends, how you balance social occasions, how you balance connecting with other writers, whatever it is, your show, all that stuff. But I will then work until about 5:30, 6 generally. And then I will have a bit of a break and get on my phone for like half an hour, just because there'll be usually lots of messages and things. And then my partner, Jules, and I will sit down, and I will read to her what I've written that day. So she kind of gets this immediacy of this, even the early drafts. So by the time the book comes out, she knows it backwards, but she knows so many different drafts. And she also knows the times I've taken detours that maybe have been aborted or pulled back or what have you. So then we'll discuss that afterwards, and that's really helpful to have somebody just giving me that immediate kind of feedback. And then, unfortunately, it's very hard at 8:00 to suddenly go, okay, well, that's done. I'm not going to think of Spud anymore. My brain keeps going until I go to bed. So ultimately, I'm just working 24/7, immersed in the book. But you must also remember, Spudders are getting into character right. It's not sitting on the outside, third person, sort of surveying in a godlike manner his world. It is very much I get in there, I feel him, I feel the differences between us. So that does mean I need to immerse myself. And I'll do that from Monday to Friday. And then generally I'm quite exhausted on the weekends. So it's not about me going, oh, wow, I want to get out. You would think you would, but it's actually about almost just recovery, emotional recovery, trying to fill that tank again before the next week. Just allow yourself to be in the moment, chill, whatever it is. Because sometimes I even find like going out to a big social occasion on a Saturday night, it starts to feel like a big effort you've got to put in because you're using those reserves. And I'm sure I can see you both nodding. So I know I'm talking directly to writers who know exactly this.
All writers are introverts, kind of stereotype.
I think that's a stereotype. It is, but it's also like many people would know me as a sort of extrovert type person because of what else I do, my theatrical career. So I've developed these two personas in a way, one that will disappear and hibernate for ages and people won't see. And then this other person who you will see during the launch will be gathering it up and shaking hands and signing books and, making talks and all the rest. But I have to put on my game face for that. That's, it looks like, I'm just cruising around. That's what I do. But you can imagine you've got a big tour ahead that's going to be nonstop. You're drawing from that same source. These are the happy days where I can be at home, chilling out, chatting to you, relaxing, doing other stuff, and then doing a bit of media around it. So, yeah.
So you've talked about immersing yourself in that Spud voice, the Spud persona. So I'm interested to know, with such a big gap between the 4th book and the 5th book, how easy was it for you to slip back into that voice? And obviously it's not exactly the same voice, because this is Spud now 10 years on. He's no longer a teenager. He's no longer at school. He's an adult now. Did it feel like slipping back into a comfy pair of shoes, or was it quite a mental exercise to get that voice back?
It was a bit of both. The initial feeling was, it was difficult. It's almost like you are trying to throw something at a moving target. And when I sat down, I knew I wanted to change. I wanted that voice to be different, but it had to still be Spud's voice. I really wanted this to be an adult novel. I mean, I thought the schoolboy novels were adult novels, but ultimately, and they are. I mean, they've got a wide readership, but they're beloved by teens and even pre-teens, to my shock and horror. Because I really, there's stuff. When I wrote those books, I was not thinking this was going to be a teen read or anything, but I obviously understand why. Because Spud is speaking to their experience, albeit in an older time. But the thing about getting into Spud, and I was saying this to somebody the other day, is that people are going to think, because I use my life for Spud and I mine myself for Spud, it's for Spud's life. They think that means that I'm almost writing a memoir with perhaps just tweaking a few funny bits. So I'm just basically recalling what happened in my life, blow for blow, and putting it in. But the truth is it's completely different. The truth is that Spud and I are quite different people. I'll give you an example. He takes himself very seriously, and I don't take myself as seriously as Spud. So the flip side of that, the first side, is that he's going to go into greater depth when he analyzes things than, say, I might just talking to you, or as John van der Ruit. He's going to pull those layers apart to analyze. He's very inward looking. He's an only child, which I'm not. He's from a really hard working class, tough working class family, which I wasn't. I was more from a middle class family. And yes, I've taken things from my family and that, but, I guess when I get into his shoes and he's serious, and the flip side is that his disasters, blunders, challenges become funnier because he takes himself more seriously. If he could just laugh them off, we wouldn't have that value of the cringe, the disaster, the mortifying stuff, particularly in the school series. But just moving on to that, when I sat down to write for the first time, that first day, I was quite nervous. I mean, it was exciting because it felt like a wild thing of like, what's going to happen? I'm now 48 years old, now writing a 28-year-old Spud. And I got in there and I found him very quickly, but it's that turn of phrase, that I think is what I found, not necessarily all the inner stuff yet, but I found that turn of phrase, and I found it sort of slightly more adult, slightly more sarcastic, world-wise, a little careworn. So these things just started to bleed in. And so the amazing thing is I can't really speak about the book too much because it's obviously before, although this is coming out after. But I believe this is quite a departure. And I think a lot of people are thinking I've come back to write a stocking filler full of thrills and spills and, explosions and farting and, adolescent stuff that was touched upon in the first few books. And I think there's going to be a surprise when people read this, not because it's all serious, but it is a more serious beast because he is. And that's the key. He takes his life seriously now, and it changes the game. And the sense of failure that sort of haunts him, his fear of failure, these darker things that I would never have been able to really get my teeth into. So, and ditto with the Crazy Eight. I think everybody's expecting this big sitting around telling stories and stuff, and there is none of that. So I think there's going to be the surprise when they read it that it's not quite maybe the novel that or what the publicity has led them to believe it's going to be, because it's a bright cover. It looks all, part of the whole, series, which it should do. But there is a boom, a sort of heavy fist coming through with the laughter, but that I don't know people are expecting.
Every time you're answering a question, you're giving me 25 more questions. So I'm going back slightly before I go into the questions you've given me now. I need to go back to your process because I need to know about this day you spend writing, and I need to know what the output looks like. Because I personally, I'm not able to write all day, and I'm very jealous of you. And now I want to know that at the end of the day, do you measure yourself in word? Do you measure yourself that you've written a certain scene of the book? What does the output look like at the end of that day?
Just to give you an example, a great question. Spud's 100,000 words long, right? This new Spud. But I must have written 250, 300,000 words. So this is not something that I just write and just, I go down that road and then I stop going down that road and I pull back, and I'll go down this road, and often I'll experiment with a number of things. And that's where having somebody like an Alison Lowry, who's my editor, Andrea Natras, who's my publisher, having those two ladies who I call the A-team, because they both start with an A, but they gave me that ability to go down the rabbit hole, pushing me, and then critiquing my stuff, my early stuff hard, where it's like, no, we don't just want the funnies. We don't just want, in a more mature voice, we want this to go. And they pushed me and pushed me. So, I basically wrote the novel at least twice, in terms of different ways. And I've also written about a 15,000 word section that would probably be in the next Spud, because I've taken him somewhere else and then decided, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep him at that school. So I've made all these decisions, but ultimately what happens, it is intricate. So answering your question about output, at different stages, that output will be different. For example, I do have a good output with Spud, and I will say that I think you can, if you're in character and you're writing a person's diary and you're inside him, I believe you have more freedom to let rip, and then fine tune and pull back and hone around that, rather than in third person, where if you start doing that, then you start to get lost, like seriously lost, and you also start to lose your balance about really what you're doing with your story. Whereas I can go, pull back, chop, and so forth. So if I'm now in full cry and everything is rolling and I know what I want to do, it's probably a first draft, and I'm now probably 40,000 words in, so I'm not messing around. So I'm just giving you an example. I could do up to 3,500 words in a day, potentially. But I've also learned that output doesn't measure up necessarily for quality. So there's no point in just smashing it if you are going to be drilling that down to 1,200, because then ultimately you would rather actually, if you're going to end up with 1.2, is write 1.6 or 1.7 or 1.8 and then pull that back. You know what I mean? So initially you get driven by the word count because it feels like momentum around you. But often that word count, I believe, can be my worst enemy, because obviously with this, I always had the clock because it had to get in for a Christmas release. And you will see it's been released in November after every other book to give me all the time I could, because I wanted that time to get to that point of where we felt we had nailed it, So Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
You talked about how people might be surprised to find that the new Spud is not all laughter and schoolboy hijinks and that kind of thing. But the first 4 books weren't really either. There was an underlying seriousness. There was tragedy. There were things, very serious things that happened, death, things going badly wrong. So people who just saw them as a laugh a minute maybe misunderstood them at the time. So is this just more of that, lightness with an underlying seriousness and a potential for tragedy? Or is it really much more serious than the other books?
Well, you know what? Let me preface it by saying that seriousness is driven by Spud's seriousness. And his, the whole book is driven by him. So it's also by the nature, and this is where I don't want to give too much away, but it's the nature of the way that he peels back the characters around him. And by going in deeper, by him opening that door, not just taking people and what they say at face value like he did when he was a younger man, I think it opens the door for us to go deeper into the marrow of this thing. So whether that's a departure that you are speaking about, like maybe that's too radical departure and maybe I've oversold it, because what you are saying is quite correct. Spud is, as I've been told, from the Bildungsroman genre. For people who aren't familiar with that of fiction, it's a sort of couple of 100 years old, and it's really about the central character. Ostensibly, they're novels of the central character, their voyage of discovery, moral learnings, and learnings about the world and themselves, a sense of growth. And now you can name many: Jane Eyre, Catcher in the Rye. Many of those novels conform to that Bildungsroman, and they're actually quite. I've only recently, in the last year, found out this term, but actually when I read it, I was like, that's exactly what it is. Spud is much closer to that than, say, an Adrian Mole type book, which superficially looks like a Spud diary. Funny, teenage boy. Well, I'm talking about the earlier ones, but teenage boy, satirically looking at his life and the life of people around him, chaotic family, all the rest. You could say, oh, that looks quite similar, but that's not a Bildungsroman type style book. It's not really about Adrian Mole's development and what he learns about life and himself. So you're absolutely right. What happens is, by the end of the novel, of all the novels, there is a sort of a growing sense of emotion and a growing sense of understanding and sort of becoming engrossed in it. So that's how I almost feel with this new Spud is the humor is embedded in it, and it's actually almost in those darker places that we're getting the humor now, rather than the big set pieces, which now don't sit as well with a more mature Spud, if you know what I mean. There's that dichotomy. And when you last thing about that, because you're asking fabulous questions, and remember, I haven't spoken to anyone for 17 months, so that's why I'm chatting. If you catch me in January, it'll be like very, very short. But the last thing, I think those readers, and I think this is what Andrea and Alison have spoken to me about, is that those readers who may find it lacking for the thrills and spills are more likely to be those younger readers who are still maybe too young to get the adult politics of a reunion and 8 boys who haven't seen each other coming back after 10 years, how that works with masculinity, men playing roles, Spud gets into that world, and I think they'd be more interested, say, in the, what they do, the outcomes of their behavior. So for that, I think it's a departure, but at the same time, I think I want them to feel like, it still feels like a Spud novel. I don't want them to feel like I'm putting them through a surgery into Spud's angst, as it were. But we are have allowed ourselves to really explore more, and I believe I get really good payoff for that for Spud in the end, in that Bildungsroman sort of genre tradition.
John, I want to go back to you. You've mentioned the perception that it's autobiographical, and I know that to a point it is autobiographical. I know that it's very much based on the school that you went to. How much is it autobiographical and how much not?
Well, I'm not sure how you guys work when you create characters, and I'm sure every writer is just different because we're all different beings, and how we create things inside is just different. But let's say, if I look back, I would say about half the Crazy Eight were quite closely. When I say, I would have no hesitation in saying this person, they were inspired by a person that I was at school with. But when I say that, I've then taken these characters and then done the usual magpie act, right? Where, so let's say, for example, the guy who inspired Rambo. Everybody who went to school with me at that time would know who that boy was. But when they read Rambo, they would go, nah, he wasn't like that. I've added layers to him where you might say the guy who inspired it was intimidating, quite threatening, quite charismatic, quite a big rule breaker. But I've now turned this guy into the sort of devious mastermind, the sly, quite sexy, attractive, sort of almost like conniving character who's thinks deeply about plotting and other people and how he's going to manipulate the situation. Whereas there was the original would have had a blunter force to get things done. So just an example there, I will then bring in a whole lot of other people, or little bits and pieces that I like that might not even be to do with school. Okay, so that's like the first type of character where you would say, okay, those are the ones where people go, yes, he's based on that guy from school, and they wouldn't be incorrect. But that guy from school is not like that character. So when I write, say, a Rambo, I'm not thinking of that guy's face. Whereas I think people think I am when I'm writing it. I'm thinking of another Rambo's face, and nor am I thinking about the film Rambo. And ditto with Spud. I've almost got this, my own look, like people develop for characters. But then there's the next level character who's based on somebody that was at school, but was like in a different house and an older boy. And I've then appropriated that person into somebody who wasn't in my dormitory and made them into my dormitory. I might never have known them, but they were sort of either legendary. So we look here at, say, a Mad Dog character, where a Mad Dog is a guy who's in a different house, 2 years older, still shooting pigeons, still a farm boy, still a wild boy and all the rest. First team rugby, famous for high tackles and ridiculous kind of displays of some aggro on the rugby field. But also people used to love him and chant his name. He had a sort of, he was a lovable character. And I then went and swiped him and made him the Mad Dog. But actually, Mad Dog, the character, is actually closer to one of my great friends who's a farmer in a Shawi, who is his cousin, Emberton. And that's the reason I actually put that in, was a little sort of inside joke. But people will never know these things. But I play and I dance. And then the third one is that I create characters completely, because that's also what I have done in the theater. And so it's quite a normal process for me. And when I do that, I'm still always doing it like a magpie taken from life. I'm never just dreaming it up based on movies or things, or books I've seen or read or whatever. So then this amalgamation comes together. Okay. So I've got a mix match originally of those 8. And then I start to drive them day by day. Okay. So their lives day by day. Now I can't remember what even those inspirations, or what I even did on a day-by-day basis in the 90s at boarding school at 10 past 10 and, 1:30. But that's all the planning, and, I remember what we did, and I write things in, I imagine it and plot it. So then people ask me at the end, is this true? Or it is, yes, it's based on my life. It's based on the sort of inspirations. But now, when I write this book, these characters, this world drives this world forward. And I'm so far from who those guys were in 1990. I haven't spoken to many of them. I mean, some I've kept up, but there's no sense of that there is a crazy eight in my life, if you know what I mean. So that means if you're thinking about the crazy eight established from that first book, it is a hugely fictional element. Now, if I tell kids at schools or, people of 15, because they all want to know, is Rambo real? Is this real? Did this happen? Did this happen? And I tell them this. It looks like I've told them that, Father Christmas is not coming this year. There's a sense of like, it's true. So I feel this thing of like when people ask me, and I'm sure somebody's going to go, did you go to your 10-year reunion? I'm going to have to say, no, I didn't. And then that's going to surprise people because they're going to go, well, how do you write your 10-year reunion without having gone there? And it's quite easy, in fact, because this is in many ways, I think people are expecting it to be a school reunion, but why would it be? This is a Crazy Eight reunion. That's going to have its own rules that run alongside, around, and across what the official reunion is going to be, obviously. So in a way, I didn't need to have to worry about that. And then also I spent, I'm probably jumping to another question, but 6 weeks on that campus when we shot the first film, which was actually where I did my research for this book, The Reunion, because the school has changed so much now that it's a beautiful place, but it looks different. They've built so many new quads and buildings and upgraded and changed gardens, and it still looks like the school, but it's a different thing. And I didn't actually go for that reason to research this book recently because I knew it would blow my mind in terms of then I'd have to ascertain what was there. So I almost relied on 2010, which I know is 7 years ago, but it's before they really started all the upgrades. And just the fact that I knew it so well from being all over that campus for 6 weeks, which I never, weirdly at school, you don't almost, because you are always going somewhere doing something. That was the first time I just got to look and soak it all up. And I think a lot of that got into this book.
So I just thought that a 10th reunion book was such a good idea because Spud is by nature a boarding school story. So to have adult Spud going back to the school, being back in that environment, back with his buddies, I thought it was such a brilliant idea. And you mentioned something about masculinity between the boys who are now men returning to the school. And I didn't even think of that because as a woman, when you go back to your school reunion, and I also didn't go to my 10th, but it's like, who's engaged? Who's got the engagement ring? Who's married? Who's got children? All these different markers of success.
Yes.
And I didn't even think of what would that be for boys who are now men. So what are those kind of tensions that fed into the book, those societal pressures that you drew on for the book?
It's brilliant question, and you bang on. And it's another fundamental change from this book to the other ones, is the sense of, let me put it this way, a sense of what have you done with those 10 years? What, with that privilege, with that school education that is meant to be the best and give you every chance to succeed. It's the time to account. It's the time to account for those 10 years and who are you? How much have you grown up? Have you changed or are you still stuck in the old mode? Are you just an overgrown schoolboy? What have you achieved? What do you have behind your name? And it was about the time in my life I started to think about that. And I think maybe as a freelancer, these are sort of questions you think about more because your whole life can feel quite freelance at times where there's nothing ever concrete. It's just moving from one project to the next. And there's no guarantee that every project you do is going to be a marvelous success or whether you're even trying to make it, because some of those are just creative things you want to do. So I did a master's in drama just before I became a professional, I suppose, until I was about 25, 20. I literally finished my master's and started writing Spud about a year later. So my master's was on masculinity, particularly, and the way that men or boys are portrayed throughout media, if we're looking now back to old novels, films, from Tom Brown's school days to, popular films about boarding schools, and also analyzing the way the writers who write about these boarding schools write about them, the kind of tone they take, the approach they take, which is very seldom complimentary, or they don't write about them at all. So in a sense also, I went into Spud, the first one, and I think people thought there was more of a happy-go-lucky thing behind it. But actually, I was quite primed, having done a master's degree in masculinity, looking at elements of hypermasculinity, when men create facades for themselves, masculine facades to cover their insecurities. And those kind of things are very important now, because at the reunion, you can imagine if you were arriving at the reunion and you were a bit of a cool dude, but you actually haven't really kicked on and you've maybe made some safe choices, you're going to come in with a bit of a false front, I would think, to try and sort of elevate maybe the tame calls you've made and make them sound more important than they are. You know what I'm saying? So we start to work in levels of facade now where we know who those characters were. But now Spud has to discover whether they've changed, whether this facade they're giving us is the real facade, or whether they have an agenda, like a Rambo. What's his agenda? Why is he genuinely like this now? So there's a lot of this where before you wouldn't. It would be like, oh, we're all fatties here, boggos this. Now it's almost like we've got to stop, unpack there, and we've got to question, for some of them, question a long way through the novel to find out what exactly their vibe is. The other thing is that, remember, 10 years gives you a lot of time to work out, think about your school years. And maybe guys are different like this. Guys sort of drift into two categories. Either they just don't think about their school years, they just love them so much, and it's just a continuation. So that reunion is just so exciting to see. And I can see it with guys from my year, oh, I can't wait, this, and we're going to drink ourselves sick. And I'm just like, but there are those guys. And then there are the others that go, I would not set foot back in there. I've done my years. I'm not going back there to go and get pissed with these oaks. The same oaks who gave me a tough time back then, or the banter back then, or whatever. So I do feel that you split into two. And obviously Spud is very interesting because he has not achieved as a freelance creative at the age of 28. And I'm using my year of 26, where I was in similar dire straits and doubts and not sure if this was going to be my career, although I desperately wanted it. And he's got so much to hide going to this reunion because he really, really hasn't kicked on, and almost like he's gone backwards since he was 24, where he felt like he had more status. Now a freelance man of 28, women looking for something a bit more established. He's not having much success there too, because it's almost like his career is infecting his whole life. So he has a lot to hide, and that's why he doesn't want to go, because he doesn't want to see his failure reflected in the eyes of his former mates who he hasn't seen for 10 years. And I won't say mates, but, they're almost like a gang. So there's a judgment in there that sits, not a caring, and I sometimes think in a girls thing, although there always be bitches and girls firmaments, but generally it's a more embracing, feeling about reunions. Like I could imagine that it's less intimidating going to a reunion than guys where, I don't know. You could tell me.
There's a lot. We could segue into talk of reunions. My 10th or 20th or something reunion inspired a thriller. So maybe that tells you what you need to know.
Was there a murder? Did somebody murder somebody else?
Not quite that thrilly. John, I wanted to ask you, Spud was the most spectacular success. Like it was unheard of in South Africa, and still is unheard of at South African levels, the amount of books you sold, how well that book did. Were you so naive that it wasn't a surprise to you? Or, how was that success for you?
Guys, that kind of thing, overall, if I look at it, it feels like an 8 or 9 year roller coaster I was on over the whole period. But when I look at the beginning, the first book was the most fascinating, because after that was set, when I launched, like now I'm launching to a big splash, people know that almost like a brand, whereas when I was starting out, I didn't have any of that. And look, some people knew me as a guy who was in theatre, but it's not like my theatre career was such that it was going to drive book sales by any means. Maybe the people who knew me might have been curious, boarding school folks. So there was really none of that. But what happens, guys, is just, and it's happening now for me, you just get this fever that takes over, and it's not a fever in me. It's a fever in the people who are working on it and I'm going to interact with. And there's a sort of a sense of like that phone just starts pinging, and it's not just messages. It's like big stuff. And so you get onto this thing where almost every day it feels like something is happening. Whether it's, John, we are going to reprint your books. Now, for example, I went to the launch of my book, and it was at the Hilton Festival, and they kindly organized a little place, and I think there was about 85 people at the Spud 1 launch. And I was very happy with that. And I remember I sold about 65 or 70 books, which they said was excellent, Mm-hmm. But I think also it was like, a lot of the theatre crowd, people who knew me, it felt like a home ground, from family, friends, and, it just felt like a warm, happy environment. But after I'd finished all the signing, my publisher at the time took me aside and said, Alison Lowry took me aside. He was the CEO, and said, now at this stage, the book was still 2 weeks away from arriving in the bookstores. She said it's gone to reprint. And that was like the first kind of thing. Okay, but we've just, the book hasn't come out. How can we going to reprint? And so it was just that sort of, budum. Literally within a week of the book coming out, Ross Garland phoned me. Well, first Anand Singh phoned me, and then Leon Schuster phoned me, and then Ross Garland, who eventually produced the films, phoned me, and all this very quickly. Then, John, we need to fly you to Joburg. We need to do this, and we're going to meet here. We've got to do this. John, London Book Fair is calling. Will you be willing to go to the London Book Fair? Like, wow, it's just, and then it's like, okay, John, I need to speak to you about the films and stuff like that. So you're going off to have a meeting about the films. So what you end up with is just almost like you are living in a film that's been scripted by someone else. And you get used to it, but initially it was just like, I couldn't believe it. It was like every day something big was happening, international publication, this, that. And it eventually became the norm, which is good, because I think if you are continually surprised and thrown by that stuff, you've got to get used to it. But the problem now is you've set up this huge thing. So now imagine this book releases to this big hype, but doesn't really sell that many, and it kind of, because I know most people around me, they go, that won't happen. They don't have my doubts, because they just go, it's Spud, and it's easy for people to say that. But when, you're my publisher and you've invested huge amount of money into this thing, and time and effort, and a total effort from the whole place, and I'm going to invest huge amounts into going on tours and making appearances for the next 9 months, it's like, you kind of like, well, what happens if there is this, it's just flat or whatever? It's like that leaves you in a hell of a pickle, So there's also this jeopardy that sits there where I think other people just think, I know it's going to be a huge success and it's going to be wonderful and it's going to sell the lights out like the old ones. But I'm told all the time by my publisher, things have changed. This industry you're coming into is a different industry. A lot of your people who read Spud have now scattered to other parts of the world. So, I also carry the fears that, when you've stuck your head this far out of the trench, it can only get shot off. So I do have that. But I think when I do get those nerves, I just think about the book, and I'm very, very, very happy with the book. I feel it is potentially the best one I've written. Whether it's the most loved, I don't know. But I think it's, in terms of skill, in terms of where I've gone and where Spud has gone, I think it's the best. So that gives me heart, you know what I mean, in those panicky moments.
Did you always know that you would revisit Spud, or did you think you were done? And either way, after 10, 11, 12 years, did publishers come to you and say, hey, what about it? Or did you go to publishers? How did it all come about, if you can tell us?
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew I would never write another school book set at school for him. When I say that in his school series, I'd moved on, and I don't know if I could really effectively write that as well as I could, because I think it's a lot easier to write that when you're close to an age to that. But so what happened with me, I was working on what I would call quite an experimental novel, very experimental novel, with another publisher, and I kept swinging at it and not finding them particularly, even though I was writing what they had signed me up to do. And there was a sort of frustration. I think they wanted me to write a different type of novel, and I wanted to write a different type of novel. We weren't sort of finding each other. And so that went on for quite a long time. But that was also while I was doing other projects. It wasn't sort of almost like I was going like, this is the only thing I'm doing now, like I have with Spud. But, so I just felt like, I needed a change too, because I felt like part of that not finding each other comes from not meeting creatively and understanding creatively. I was working with people I hadn't worked with before. So I then chatted to my great confidant and mate, Alison Lowry, and I said to her, I've got this idea. First of all, I said, what do you think? Now, Alison's not somebody who thinks many of my ideas are good. But she's a tough audience for me. But so that's really good, guys, because, I don't want people just to go, oh, it's lovely, John, it's lovely. I want someone to smash me. And she does. And she said, it's a brilliant idea. Like you said earlier, it's just a very, very clever idea, because it allows you to reinvent it and then rediscover it. And then she took me through every publisher that is available to me, providing I wasn't working with the people I was before. And the name Pan Macmillan came out also with the fact that she does a lot of work with them as an editor now. And then this suddenly sat down of, Alison and I could work together on this like all the other books. Well, the first I did most of it by myself, because she didn't know me until I submitted it. But certainly from then on, it was her baby, even though she was the CEO, not the publisher. So basically I said to them, look, I don't want this whole big thing where I go to the publisher and dinner and everything. So I said, can we do this a bit slyly at your next meeting with the publisher and maybe the CEO to talk about books that you're working on? Can you just throw out this idea and see if they might be interested? So this was slated for 2 weeks down the line. So we waited 2 weeks. And I was quite relieved, because I didn't want to just suddenly, because I know how it can work sometimes. These guys just suddenly, if they jump on it. So she met them on this Friday, and she sent me a message and said they are very, very interested. And then on Saturday, I received a email from the MD and the publisher, really expressing a lot of interest. And within about a month, I had a 20-page marketing publicity planning document. This is over a year ago, for how what's happening now is going to unfold. So I was like, these guys are serious. Like, this is a serious environment I'm coming into. And I felt like that right through the process, that it's a serious environment, a professional, very, very professional environment. And I think it brought out the best in me, and it pushed me hard, and that's what you love as a writer too, to be pushed. So that's how it happened. It was quite a curious thing, but the idea first came during COVID, when I had a bit of time to just stop and think. And it was also a kind of thing of like, I had this thing of like, man, I wish I had a Spud book to come out now. Just not so much for the sales, but just because everybody was so down and it was such a hectic time, and it would have been just like, kind of, especially if it being funny, but I didn't have one to do at that stage. But I think that started me thinking about how this might work down the line.
You spoke a little bit about basing characters on people from school. And I'm quite curious, do those people come back to you? When the Spud books came out, did you get emails going, how could you take me and use me in that way? Or delighted that you've done it? Or what's that reaction been?
No, I have very little contact with the Crazy Eight. When I say that, half of them are invented, so I couldn't have contact with them. But those that have, the one that I suppose I've kept in most contact with is the guy who inspired Rambo, and he's still kind of an interesting cat. But his nickname at school was Blow, B-L-O-U, like blue. And he's now called himself Rambo Blow. So I think he's taken it on himself, for his nickname, which I think is then a sign that he actually thinks, I've sort of, and I think he is. I think he's quite a cool character. So that is that. But the others I haven't seen, and they haven't been in touch. But I'm in touch with a lot of Michael House guys from our year who know the whole scenario quite well. So, but yeah, it's kind of, you must remember I was with quite a crazy, unique bunch of guys, not the normal Michael House boarding school guys. There were sort of nutters in our dormitory, and I include myself in that too. People whose lives maybe have not followed a sort of normal track.
What house were you in?
Founder's House. And I don't know why, but they just seem to put all the nutters in there at once in our year.
John, we always like to ask our guests this. What have you been reading or listening to or watching lately that you can tell us about?
Yes. Well, I've been watching I watch more when I write. I find it hard to, after a full day's work, to then curl up with somebody else's story. It's just the way it is. And also I'm a terrible mimic. So if I'm reading, some wonderful novel at night, if I'm reading a great comedic novel at night, my style is going to then try and ape that in the morning, and then I'm only going to have to cut that. So that's for me. I'm now looking forward to it. I feel like I want to immerse myself I'm looking forward to Craig Higginson's new book. I've still got to catch up on Russie and a few other things that I still got to clear off the desk. But in terms of, I prefer to watch, I'll watch podcasts, but from political, sporting, arts, literary. I enjoy just almost doing things that are going to take me away from that. But now that I'm free, I'm planning to get stuck in and read and really get stuck in, because I don't have to write the next morning.
Okay, well, we hope that everyone checks out Spud the Reunion, and I'm on the side of those who are extremely confident that it's going to do very, very well. But we wish you all the luck with it, and also strength for these 9 months ahead, because Gail and I know on a much smaller scale.
9 months has never been factored into my marketing.
Quite how tiring that is. But
thank you.
But thank you so much for your time, John. It's been wonderful to chat to you.
Oh, thank you. And I really appreciate you having me on your show. You've asked such great questions and really opened up such interesting discussions around this whole topic. So thank you. I think it takes writers in many ways to understand other writers. So well done, guys, and thank you.
Gail, we are so lucky that we get to talk to people like John van der Reet, aren't we?
Can you believe it, Fiona? We get to just say, oh, I'd like to speak to so-and-so, and then they come and sit with us and speak to us.
So what did you get out of what John said?
There was so much there, as always. But I think the thing that made the biggest impression on me was when he talked about how different the process is of getting into a character who's a first-person diary character, where you really have to almost be completely entrenched in their personality to get their voice right, versus the third-person writing, where remaining slightly out of it. And I think he didn't say, but I think he includes in that first-person non-diary type writing, where you are still slightly a spectator, that it's a different process to get into that, and maybe not as all-consuming. And I found that really, really interesting. I think writing something like Spud is a very unique writing experience. It's probably different from anything you and I have done, in terms of what it takes from the writer.
I agree. And this is based not on what John was specifically talking about, but just my thoughts about what it must have been like for him 10, 12, 15 years ago as a young writer to write this absolutely boundary-breaking breakthrough novel that did so well, was made into a major movie with John Cleese. And I was remembering back to that time when I was also a debut author and what the perception in the writing community of Spud was, and how there was, unfortunately, quite a bit of petty jealousy and an idea that Spud had maybe stolen all the readers from everybody else, and how that probably affected him in some way.
It must have.
He was so warmly welcomed by readers, and I wonder if he felt as warmly welcomed by the writing community.
I wonder, and I hope that this time round he has a wonderful experience of it, because as we've seen, the South African writing community is amazing. It is on the whole, a welcoming, lovely space, where we have both found enormous support. And I really hope that he has that experience, even though he is the big star coming back to the writing community.
Yes, I think that the writing community has matured a lot since then. There are so many more writers in the space now. It's become so diverse. The publishing lists of the major publishers and even the minor ones are so long now. So many books come out. The reading audience is so much more open to South African fiction. They won't read only one South African book a year, and that's Spud. You know, there's room for everybody. And I hope that John feels how excited we are to welcome him back into that space and to just have him back with all the excitement of a new Spud book.
And that I really hope that other writers feel like we do, that this is really exciting. Like one of our big writers is writing again, and that can only be great for all of us. It's really exciting that he's back.
It's great to have a Christmas season where there's a Spud book for us to give as a gift.
It makes everything so much easier.
Yes, it does. So, Gail, can you believe that we are at the end of season 4 now?
I honestly can't. I think back to when you approached me to do this, and I thought maybe we'd do one season. I really didn't see what a big project this was going to be and what an enriching project this was going to be. And I've loved every season, but this season for me has just felt like, I don't know if we've come into our own or if we've just had amazing people, but we always have amazing people. So maybe it's us. Maybe we've come into our own, but I have loved the season. It has felt like ice cream to me.
All good stuff. And we're really looking forward to season 5. And we have such a wish list of writers that we would love to have on our podcast for season 5, and that we're going to have to whittle them down.
I think that our listeners may have realized we're getting a little bit more ambitious in our wish lists. So hopefully we'll be bringing you some really exciting people.
Yep, we've had some big names, and hopefully it's just going to get bigger from here on. So here's to season 5.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.